everything you wanted to know about Checkrides. We're live with the DPE today in the hangar.
I used to be a well-respected member of the aviation community, and then I started flying to Cirrus, and that changed.
Oh, that was great until the engine quit.
And all of a sudden I see these explosions and these trees exploding.
I'm walking away a better pilot because of this discussion.
All right, we are live today in the hangar. I'm Christy Wong at Pilot Christy.
And I'm Dan Milliken at off.taking. And we're here to talk with Joe Johnson, DPE. We've had Joe Casey on before, and we're so pleased to finally be able to get you on the show. Joe, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
So we're talking Checkride issues and all the things that pilots want to know from a DPE.
Yeah, absolutely. So Joe's agreed to come on and answer some Q&A. But first, we'd like to find out a little bit more about you as a person. So why don't you tell us about yourself, Joe?
Well, born and raised in Louisiana, grew up on a farm, and family also had some crop dusting. So first airplane ride, of course, and a crop duster. And from there, that was pretty much it. I was hooked. That was the bait was laid out, and I was on the way from that point on.
I want to know, on Facebook, I see your icons, your pictures. I see your coffee cup. What's the deal with Snoopy?
So I've always been a Snoopy fan all my life, and in fact, when I watched the Snoopy shows, I couldn't wait for the scenes where the Snoopy and the Red Baron was coming out to fight. So
There you go.
I've always been a Snoopy fan.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'll get the ball rolling with some Q&A. What are some basic don'ts on Checkride Day?
Okay. Well, the obvious would be don't come unprepared. But the biggest thing that I probably run into for check rides would be that the logbook is missing endorsements, or there's documentation missing for the aircraft, or something of that nature. And then we wind up having to end the check ride before we ever actually got started.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not good.
Okay, what are some of the good things that pilots arrive having done or doing?
Well, some of the things that I see that I really like is they show up well prepared. They have all their documents in order. They have copies of everything made ahead of time. Most DPEs keep records of their activity, so I ask that they bring a copy of their pilot certificate, their medical certificate, their photo IDs, the written test. If they're graduates of Part 141 schools, then a copy, obviously, of the graduation certificate. And then any additional documentation that they can provide would be quite helpful as well. So the aircraft, the maintenance logs on that aircraft. You know, if you can go ahead and prove that the aircraft is airworthy before we get started, that helps as well.
So that's actually a really good question, because a lot of times people are using rental aircraft. Do you want the actual logs, or are copies for you acceptable?
In most cases, I have a rapport with the place where they're renting the aircraft, so I'm well aware of their maintenance programs.
Okay.
And if they have a dispatch sheet that shows that the aircraft has had all the required maintenance and it's signed by someone of prominence at that location, then I would accept that as well. But in most cases, if it's an individual's aircraft, I will simply ask that they bring me a photocopy of the annual and the required inspections and such that indicates that the aircraft has had all the required inspections done on it.
All of your AV8 and...
That's correct.
Okay, gotcha. Perfect.
Okay, so we've talked a lot in the past on other episodes about the private pilot check ride, the instrument check ride, the commercial, and so on. What's your favorite check ride to do as a DPE?
I would say that my favorite check ride would probably be the private pilot. And the reason is...
Okay, so
yeah.
the original, the PPL.
Yeah. And the reason being is they're enthusiastic. They're looking forward to getting their flying career off to a good start. And so they're probably the most fun. You give an opportunity to pass something forward, or pay it forward, if you will, to the applicant, from all your years of experience and such. And so that's, I find that very meaningful, with a private pilot applicant.
Yeah, your private pilot's your gateway license.
Right,
so.
yeah. Yeah, your gateway. Yeah. Well, and on the private, we're getting some questions in. Alex Nunez says that he's starting his pilot training. So he wants to know, should I get my ground school done first or do it all together?
Well, there's a couple different schools of thought on that. A lot of people will go to weekend courses and try to knock it out right away. The problem with that is you're drinking from a fire hose, and not much of that is retained in the end. I have always suggested that if you can do it along the way, that it kind of sticks a little better. And then somewhere before you finish the training, you're going to need to wrap up the written test.
All right, and then Tobias from Maryland is getting ready for his instrument. What's the maybe the top advice or top 2 points of advice you'd give to Tobias to get ready for his instrument check ride?
Well, the first thing would be chill out.
Chill out. Don't be nervous.
Yeah, don't be nervous. This
Oh,
is something
that's
that you've
so
done a million
hard.
times, and that is true. It's hard to get used to that. However, if you intend to be a professional pilot, you may as well get used to it because you're going to be tested at least once, maybe twice a year from this point forward until you end your flying career.
That's great to know.
So you need to get
Yeah.
used to the check ride. Most airlines actually have programs in place to help you with the jitters, if you will.
Right.
We call them wingman programs at American Airlines. And so because we do have people that still even at
What do they do, like bring puppies to you and let you like massages?
I wouldn't say puppies, but yeah, something
Okay,
along
gotcha.
that line.
So flight training for the millennials.
Yeah, right. That's what I'm saying. Like, you know.
Snowflake training.
Well, I've seen some college campuses during exam week, finals and whatnot. They actually bring puppies and let people pet the puppies, and it calms them down and stuff. So, I mean, I just figured American Airlines was with the times. But
It is a highly stressful event. Any of the check rides. Myself, I actually get a little nervous about it because on any given day, a pilot can have a bad day and mess up
Right.
a check ride. And so that's why we have those programs in place to help keep people on the up and
All right, so I've got a question.
Go for it.
As I've gone through my ratings, one of the things that I've heard over and over again is that the DPE on the check ride, he is not to instruct. But I would say through all my check rides, especially commercial and CFI initial, I have learned so much from those check rides. So how do you balance I guess you guys have some kind of mandate where you're not supposed to instruct? I mean, what is the deal there?
That's correct. We are not allowed to teach during the course of the test. The applicant is supposed to know everything that when he shows up for the check ride. However, once an applicant successfully completes a maneuver, there's always an opportunity at that point then to pass along any additional information that you may have or can show them once they've satisfactorily met the task requirement. But you cannot do it prior to that. So you will find a lot of DPEs either in the debriefing or as they go along. Once an applicant has met the requirement on a test, they will try to provide them some additional insight or additional information that would help them in the future, going forward.
Well, you guys, I would imagine that every DPE is also a CFI at some point.
That's correct. We have to maintain at least a CFI. Most DPEs will have a CFI, II, and the MEI. That will determine to some degree what you're allowed to give check rides for.
Okay. All right, well, let's go to some other questions.
yeah, we've got a lot of questions on here now.
Well, that's
I saw one on here where an individual was saying, how many check ride failures should I be worried about?
oh, that's good. So, yeah, if somebody out there has failed a check ride, I mean, is that a showstopper? I mean, is that something to be really stressing?
I wouldn't say that it would be anything necessarily to stress over. We have hired applicants who have had failures in the past. I've failed the test before in my history, so it's not uncommon to have a bad day, if you will, and not pass a check ride or pass a written test or something of that nature. It's just how many, and was it for the same event? And the biggest thing is if you've had a failure in your past, going forward to the airlines with the interview, they're going to ask you that.
Oh, they are?
They will ask you that, and
Yeah.
it's imperative that you be
so it does
honest
flag
with
your
them.
Well, yeah, here's the thing is that you have to be able to talk through it. So, for example, what did you learn from that experience? I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's more what they're looking for is so you failed it this time or these many times, but you eventually passed it. What did you learn from those experiences?
Well, which is interesting too, because I guess DPEs, for the most part, you guys, this is not your full-time job. You guys have day jobs that you're doing.
That's correct. Most of us have an additional
Unless you're
job in
retired or
aviation.
whatever.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And so for you, you're an airline pilot.
That's correct.
Part 121.
Part 121.
Okay. And Carissa, you've been considering going that route and considering. So what? Because of that, that's good to know about. Failings can go with you going up, but that it's not a showstopper. Going forward, what's your next check ride if you're going to head towards the airlines? Do you have a check ride for the ATP, or is that some other deal?
Yes. Well, if if I were to go that path, then I would wind up doing my ATP in conjunction with like a type ride or what have you. So my next check ride, if you will, is going to be the ATP slash
And that's
type
the
ride.
final one?
I wouldn't say final, but
Well, other than,
well, because I mean, depending on which airline I get on with, et cetera, depending on the airframes that they have, if they have multiple airframes, then you'll wind up doing check rides essentially for each airframe. My understanding is that if you upgrade to captain, you'll do a captain check ride on
So
the
there's all
particular
those kind of
airframe.
things.
I
That's
mean,
correct.
it never ends.
It never
I've
ends.
learned.
Which is what I
Yeah.
was saying earlier. If you have check ride
Get
itis,
used
it's
to
best
it.
to get over it now because you'll be doing check rides the rest of your career.
so get used to check rides if you want to go that route.
Right.
Now, for me, I'm not heading to the airlines. I'm flying for fun. I'm flying for just for my own business.
Says the commercial rated CFI now. It's like, I'm just doing it for fun.
Well, I did.
We all
I
have
got my
different levels of
CFI
fun.
really for fun. I mean, I'm not doing it for a living or anything like that.
Okay, fair enough.
So, and somehow passed. I mean, walking out. By the way, for those who don't know, Joe gave me my commercial check ride, and Joe Casey did my CFI initial, and walking out of, I really didn't know if you were going to give me if I'd passed or not coming into land. I was like, because I felt like, I've walked out of the last, almost all my check rides, I've walked out going, I'm not there yet.
Right, like I know nothing.
I know nothing.
Yeah,
Is that
I
a
feel
common
that.
thing, or did I really just know nothing?
No, that's pretty common. Most applicants at the end of the check ride, they don't know whether they passed or they failed, and so that's why it's important that we let them know that the progress was satisfactory or unsatisfactory. In fact, our guidance tells us that once we reach the point where the applicant is unsatisfactory, we're to let them know.
All right, one question from Mike Farlow. He's making his run for his commercial pilot check ride. He wants to know how far out should he make contact with you to get on your schedule?
So I run about 2 to 3 weeks out, average.
Okay.
Some examiners
That's not
will,
bad.
No, some examiners will schedule a lot further than that. If I'm full 3 weeks out, I'll generally tell people we'll be about a month away. But the reason I'll only schedule just a couple of weeks out is because obviously life happens, weather happens, situations arise, and as a result, we get cancellations. I do keep a standing waiting list of people. That way, if I do get a cancellation, I'm on the phone immediately to those
Okay.
applicants saying, hey, I have an opening. Can you be here on this day?
Okay.
I will say this, last year, when I was struggling to get my multi-engine check right in, I did reach out to Joe and he was like, I'll work you in. Actually, I think his first response was, wait, are you the Wong Warrior lady? But he was very amenable to try and get me in if I couldn't get in with the DP I was trying to schedule with, so. And what I found is that most DPs are like that. They're, they will do their best, but again, life happens. I mean, you have a full-time day job.
That's correct.
So, he just likes to DPE for fun on the side.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's like me, CFI, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fun on the side.
He's doing it for the love of aviation.
Yeah, it's really the love of aviation. Absolutely.
It has to be for what you guys go through.
Yeah, it's for the money we make.
Yeah, right.
And talking about, I mentioned it briefly. You are heading towards the airlines, although it's probably a big secret. But I'm not. And somebody, Scott asks, what about those of us who don't have commercial aspirations? Are we treated differently? And that's a really good question because, do you look when you know I'm coming to get a CFI initial, and I'm just doing it for the fun of it? Do you kind of hold a different standard than the person who is, they just finished their commercial, now they're doing their CFI, and they're trying to get the time build? Is that handled differently?
No, it's not. As a matter of fact, it's very clear in our guidance that we cannot hold any prejudice or have any different standards, for one person from the next. Think about the question that you just asked. If knowing that Christy was going to the airline and I held one standard for her and that you weren't, and I held a different standard for you, and say maybe she didn't pass because of the higher standard versus you did pass, that would obviously create a conflict there. And would seem as though there was some form of bias, right? So that's why there's absolutely zero prejudice involved or bias involved in it. The standard is the standard, and everyone has to meet the same standard. Reason being, you could easily change your mind the moment you get your commercial license and subsequently
Oh,
go
yeah.
apply to the airline.
Yeah.
And now we have a substandard pilot, if you will, who's now working for an airline, and that's not what we would want out there. So we maintain an even standard for everyone, regardless of who that may be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It does.
Actually, so this was a question we asked Joe Casey, but I'd like Joe Johnson's perspective on it.
Do you have to be named Joe to be a DPE?
Exactly, apparently,
true.
that's rule number one. So there's been a rumor, of course, out there that people are like, oh God, I hope the feds don't come on this check ride. And because you could be held to a different standard if you're being watched by an FAA representative. Is that true, or how true is that?
I don't know about the other examiners. It holds absolutely zero bearing with me. I was an APD at American Eagle for 6 years on one fleet, and I've been a check airman to some degree for 14 years, and I've had numerous FAA observations over the course of those years. To me, when the FAA shows up, it's just validating the quality of the ride, if you will. I don't do the check ride any differently than I would. The applicant obviously is nervous because they feel like, well, you know, not only am I being watched by the examiner, I'm being watched by the FAA, and I could lose my license over this. And that's not nearly the case. The FAA is there to make sure that the examiner is doing the job that he's been assigned to do.
All right, so they're not watching the check ride applicant, they're watching you.
They're watching the examiner.
They're watching you watch the
That's
applicant,
correct. There's
okay.
certain things that we're supposed to do and in a given order, and they're making sure that we follow that order and do the things that we're required to do.
Awesome.
Last question I have, how does somebody become a DPE?
So to become a DPE, there's an application process now involved in DMS. I'm sure most of us have heard by now of the Designee Management System. This was a program that was brought on by the FAA to help with the management of all the designees that are out there, and that's the process now in which one would apply. You would go to the FAA website, you would find the DMS page on that website, and you would open an account and do your application there. There are minimum requirements that are spelled out in the 8900.2. Well, that's been deferred now, but 8900.1 that has the minimum requirements, and that would tell you whether or not you meet those requirements and if you should apply.
Yeah.
All right, so Alexander is asking that he's going to start training. Is there a benefit to using the same DPE throughout all the check rides?
There's a handful of aviators in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex that have used me for their ride from zero to hero, if you will. There is, once you establish that rapport, obviously each check ride becomes a little less stressful because you now have a relationship per se, but you have to make sure that you maintain that boundary and that it's not crossed where there's an expectation that you're going to be given credit or pass for something that is substandard, if you will. In other words, he's my friend, so he's going to let me through. And that's not the case. We're not supposed to establish a friendship in the manner in which we would allow someone with less than the minimum requirements be, moved forward.
Well, so, like, Chrissy, you've used the same DPE through most of your check rides.
Most, not all, but most, yes.
And then I've used a different person on every single one.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's an advantage or disadvantage to that.
I mean-
I would think maybe there is an advantage to using the same because they know you and they might challenge you because they're not going to ask the same question that somebody different might.
Right. Well, it's actually a catch-22, at least in my brain, there is, because the DPE that I wound up utilizing through most of my check rides, he came to know how I prepared, who I was, how I studied. And so I almost felt as though there was an expectation that to go above and beyond. I mean, for me, it was like, okay, so he knows that I'm like this on check rides. I need to bring it every single time. But at the same time, I was able to humanize him as well, which made it a little bit, I guess, easier for me, because it was like, oh, hey, it's you. Oh, you are totally here to judge me again. Like,
Right.
Overall, I had really great check ride experiences. I can't say that there was any that were particular, but I was probably harder on myself than anything because of the expectations. Like, he knows how I perform,
Right.
So.
All right. Well, so Michael Cirillo's asking, do you feel like there's a DPE shortage, and what is the FAA doing if that's the case?
Well, there is a shortage. There's a shortage at all levels. We're seeing it from the flight schools to the airlines to the examiners. And the FAA is attempting to get more examiners out there, make them available. They've also relaxed our restrictions.
That's right. You can do 3 instead of you were restricted to only 2 check rides in a day.
That's correct. We were restricted to 2 complete rides a day, and we were also restricted to 1 initial CFI per day. It has now been relieved to where we can do 3 full rides a day. Now, that's going to be a long day for an examiner.
Right.
You figure the average ride runs start to finish 4 hours. That's about
Right.
that's kind of what I block. I figure 2 for
We're
the
talking
ground
for
portion.
private instrument.
Private instrument, commercial. An add-on ride obviously would go less time, or
CFI initial would be all day.
CFI initial is an all-day event. And then, of course, discontinuances and retests and stuff would take less time. But to do 3 full rides, private instrument, commercial rides, is pretty tough.
Have you done it?
I have done 3 full rides in a day. Well, not full rides, I'm sorry, not 3 full rides. I've done 3 rides. They were commercial add-ons, multi-add-ons.
So you haven't done like 3 privates in a day?
No,
Or 3
and I don't think I
CFIs
could do.
or-
Well,
yeah,
no,
right.
CFI is only one day. one
Okay,
in a
I was
day.
like,
right.
whoa.
No, that would be a bit of a stretch. I tried 2 full rides and 1 add-on, and I was going from daylight to dark to make it
Yeah.
happen.
Wow.
So it's not a good day. You're
That's
worn
a
out
lot
at
of
the end of the day.
aviation.
I don't want to be the third check ride on that day.
Right.
Actually, there's a really good question here from Scott. What is the most common reason for failures that you see?
The most common reason, well, that varies because
Right, the different.
yeah.
Okay, so
depending
let's
on-
start
Take
with
private.
Yeah, let's start with the private.
Okay, on the private ride, I would say it's actually it's either on the oral portion of it would be the lack of preparation on the oral. We get into the memorization stuff. How long's your medical good for? What your currency requirements is usually pretty good. And then when we get into the navigation or the weight and balance, that's where we start to see the falterings, if you will, during the course of the test. When we get into the flying aspect of it, they're easily distracted oftentimes, and they'll get off altitude and there's no correction, or it's continuous deviations from the standards, and that's what we see a lot of times.
Continuous, not just the one.
Yeah.
Not just
so
the one,
continuous,
that's
and they're not actively correcting it. So, for example, I'm a private pilot student, or check ride applicant. I'm on a check ride with you. I get, a couple hundred feet off because I got caught up in an updraft. I need to verbalize it. All right, off altitude, and then correcting, and then actually correct it. That's what you're looking for?
To a degree, yes.
Okay.
The standards may, for each check ride are spelled out in the ACS or the PTS, as the case may be, and they give you your altitude and heading and speed deviations that are allowed. And what I explain to every applicant is there's no such thing as a perfect check ride. They're kind of like unicorns and leprechauns, and I haven't seen any of those lately. So I try to humor them to some degree and say, listen, if you make a mistake, if you get off heading or altitude, don't give up. That's the biggest thing that
Right.
is they'll give up. They get frustrated with themselves and they give up. And our hands are tied. If you give up,
So, have you had check ride applicants that were like, okay, we're done. I can't do this?
That's correct.
Wow.
yeah, they give up.
Oh, wow.
And when they give up, we're done.
Okay.
If we get a deviation, I look at things like, well, what caused the deviation? How bad was it? How often is it happening? Are they taking corrective action? These are things that all examiners were going to look into, because there are things that would cause you to possibly deviate.
Or you hit a thermal that was
Correct.
big.
Traffic. you
Weather,
have to get off
traffic,
heading.
wake turbulence. There's a variety of things that can cause someone to deviate from the standard. And if it's not caused by the applicant, then the examiner has the leeway to say, we need to do that again. And so we look at that, and then we take a whole picture and determine, do we have a safe applicant here? Did he meet the standard?
Right.
Okay.
All right, last question.
Well, we also need to take questions
Do
from
we
the
have any?
audience.
Okay, so let's hand the mic. All right, so ma'am, in the red shirt, in the red gift shirt.
Yeah, exactly.
Questions. I see students who are nervous, right? What are their options when nerves start to affect them badly, such as now I have an upset stomach, I have a new headache, or during pre-flight they run into a wing? That's never happened. What are their options there when they feel like they just can't go on?
Well, it's funny you should mention that. I've actually had that happen before.
Had what?
I had a student who excused himself from the oral and went to the restroom because their stomach was upset and they were actually heaving. And,
So they threw up.
That's correct.
Okay.
And they came back and they were somewhat pale in the face, and I asked them if they were okay, and they explained to me what had just happened.
Yeah.
And I said, well, we should probably discontinue at this point until we can get this under control, because if we continued, obviously things would probably start breaking down and wasn't going to end well. So
No.
I made the decision at that point, let's discontinue the ride. With respect to someone who has a physical ailment during the course, I would say to them, refer to the I'm Safe checklist that's in the Airman's Information Manual and adhere to that to the best of their ability. If they're not physically prepared or to fly, then obviously shouldn't show up for the flight. Mentally, I will do everything I can to try to put them at ease. I use humor a lot during the course of the test. You've seen that from me just in talking and in passing. So I don't think that there's a lot of things that are rumors that are spread about examiners. You know,
Inhuman robots?
Yeah,
Definitely
exactly.
heard that rumor.
I try to dispel any rumors that may be out there about me by putting the applicant at ease as best I possibly can and giving them benefit of the doubt.
Right. So let's say they're in the airplane and, they're actually in the middle of the check ride and they're just like, okay, I just need a moment. Like, do you let them take a moment just to collect their thoughts or give themselves a second to regroup?
If they're conscientious enough to make, aware of the situation where they need a moment, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
Okay, and if we don't, do we? Okay, the last question that somebody's asked online, does the plane used in the check ride have any influence at all?
On the check ride?
Yeah, I
So
mean,
for
does it
example,
make it
you're-
easier or harder?
Yeah.
So like if I'm going to do a commercial, should I do it in my complex or should I just find a 172 now since that's allowed? Or, is a 172 maybe a high wing for a private pilot easier than a low wing Piper? I mean, do you find any difference in that?
I don't see a lot of difference in the high wing, low wing. I do see differences in the complexity of the aircraft that's brought to the check ride.
Okay.
I've actually had people show up or want to show up in a Cessna 150 in the middle of July for a commercial check ride, and I've explained to them, first of
We're
all,
going to do a Chandelle in that?
right.
Yeah.
I don't know that we would make it around without running out of steam. Secondly, the size of the applicant.
Oh, gosh,
in an
right.
aircraft that small is such a small useful load that we may not be able to actually complete the ride in one tank of fuel, if you will.
One tank of fuel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very, very nicely put.
So, but it doesn't have an impact on how the ride is presented. We still have to present the same maneuvers, and we have the same standards to apply to. The applicant is expected to know how to use everything that he brings. I have run into that situation before where they bring an unfamiliar airplane and they're not able to utilize the equipment, for example, in navigation. I've had add-on rides, and we have to do one approach, and the applicant doesn't know how to utilize the GPS or the avionics that are
So
in the
know
airplane.
your plane.
That's correct. Know your
It
aircraft.
doesn't matter
when you
which
show up.
plane you bring, just
Just
know
know
it.
the airplane that you bring. That would be a good statement.
Well, good. Thank you, Joe, so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
And Chrissy, why don't you thank him and send us out?
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today with our special live edition of In the Hangar. Please share, subscribe, and like. And if you have questions for DPEs, leave them in the comments below. Until next time, we'll see you guys later.